in this episode of the Critical Oxygen podcast. Your goals have to be SMART. And that's not just, I think about my goals. It's an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, reachable and realistic. There it is. And timely. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Critical Oxygen podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your athletic potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson, and today we're joined by continuing guest host, Aaron Geiser, where we're going to talk about goal setting. Aaron, welcome back to the show.
Phil, how's it going?
Good, man. Good. What's fun is we always get to do a talk before the podcast and get to share our dreams and all of that sort of stuff, and maybe share our goals, which actually is a perfect juxtaposition. Another corny intro, nailing it.
I hope people enjoy these from the
get-go. So today, that's our main objective, is to talk about goal setting. We're kind of in the off season right now, so I was kind of hoping to actually take a step back first and talk to you about how you are recovering from your 70.3 and how you're training and everything like that. And then maybe if you're willing to talk to people about, what your goals are currently in the off season, just to give them an idea of what's going on.
And I'd be happy to share that. It's kind of funny that we had like a 30-minute pre-production meeting that we were just talking. It's kind of weird that we're just getting into it now.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the recovery from the race, I mean, we're talking about 2.5 months removed from that. So
has it really been that long?
Yeah, I guess at least 2. We're coming up. 2 months off, I guess. So
okay.
It has been a little bit of time. So fully recovered, I've made trips out to California and trips down to Florida for Ironman California and Ironman Florida in that time. Mm-hmm. And Phil, to be completely honest with you, I probably came back a little bit more, I'm not going to say wrecked, but a little bit more challenged from the Florida trip, just because my wife and I drove down with our dogs and then drove back up, and we tried to get those trips done in a single day, which was a good probably 12 hours of driving. So I think that did a little bit more to setting the body back a bit than anything else. The flight out to California was kind of easy. I ended up being able to train pretty much every day I was there. I want to say over the course of a week, I probably put in about 15 hours of biking that week. Then
wow.
In Florida, it was a little bit different. And I think the body was just a little bit more, I don't want to say beat up, but it was just a little bit more fatigued. And since getting back from that, it's been 2 weeks now. Last week was a little bit more of just trying to get into a little bit more of a rhythm. This week, it was definitely got into a rhythm. So the recovery process is going, it's back to normal and getting into some normalized training. I did kind of add in some strength training this week. And when I went to lead my Zwift ride this week, which was a banger, 5-minute VO2 max sets, it was, I got
fun
to about that third set and the wheels completely came off because I want to say it's because of the strength training the day before, but I don't know. It was enough for Dan to give me a pretty hard time on, because he looked at and watched my watts per kilos just drop off the mat. But every now and then that happens, especially when you're leading rides for the Southern Hemisphere and they're kind of in their specific phase of training, and I'm fully into the off season. So
right,
really to kind of sum up where things are from a training perspective now is I'm looking at what I want to accomplish for 2024, and from there is how I start to build kind of the first portion of that off season. So right now I am really starting to log a lot of run mileage right now. So I want to say the last 2 weeks I've put in about 50 miles of running, most of which has been with my dogs too, which is fun because it's kind of like a daddy-daughter experience in cases. And a lot of times I'm running with both of them at the same time. and have a really good one. It wears 2 of my 3 dogs out. So it makes the life around the house a lot more normal at the evening, because if they don't get their exercise, they tend to like to do a little bit of wrestling before my wife and I are trying to settle down, and the dogs are having some form of a wrestle match in the middle of us. So it's nice to kind of prevent that. But what I'm trying to do is set up a really, really good run year. And in that right now, just laying down a lot of foundational base miles and a lot of zone 2 work. I'm really at this point not doing any tempo, and I'm starting to throw in some strides toward the back half of 2 of the workouts per week. But for the most of it, most of those miles are being logged at just an aerobic effort level and heart rate. And then when I always continue to put time on the bike and expose myself. Like right now, I am putting about 8 hours of cycling per week in, with 2 of those sessions being, I know that I said this week was a 5-minute VO2 max long, but most of my workouts right now in intensity are a little bit more in the VO2 max short. So I'm started with some 30-30s. I've started to transition to some 30-15s and some 40-20s in that case. So 40 seconds on, 20 seconds of recovery, 30 seconds on, 15 seconds of recovery, or 30 seconds on, 30 seconds of recovery for the audience there.
Yeah. How do you gauge the efforts on like the 40 seconds on?
So
like, is it by FTP?
It typically for me is FTP, but it also, as we all recognize, we have good days and bad days. Just like I was talking about on that 5-minute effort, I probably came out with the effort that I would have had on maybe a 3-minute effort, came out with it on 5 and just couldn't hold it for the repetitions toward the back half of it. Right. But traditionally, Phil, how I kind of segment this is it's roughly about 118 to 121% of what I have my FTP set at. Now, there are days where I'll kind of, let's say that I'm doing 3 sets of 8 repetitions. I'll get through the first one and say, man, typically I'm shooting for kind of that 8.5 to 9.5 effort level from an RPE management, and still having that kind of feel when I get to the final rep in that set that I have 1 or 2 more reps left. So if I get to that final rep in that set and I feel like, well, that was more of a 7.5, maybe right at that 8, I'll look at doing about a 5 to 8% increase on the wattage for the next rep. So then I'll just increase my bias slightly to elevate that FTP, or not FTP, but the wattage for that particular segment to maybe end up being 123 to 125%. Everything goes according to plan. I feel like I hit that 8 to 9, 8 or 8.5 to 9.5 with some reserve left in. Then I'll go ahead and hop into that final repetition or final set of repetitions with that same wattage. But again, if I kind of hit the end of that rep in that second set and feel like, well, I still feel like I got a little bit more to give, then I kind of just based on the increase of how it felt from 1 to 2 and how it felt at the back half of that second set of repetitions. So that's typically how I kind of make that adjustment of progressing through a VO2 max set. But I am still throwing those in at this point. And from the swim standpoint, 2 swims dedicated solely to technique a week, with a third that's more strength based. So I'm working, like this morning was 3,500 with pull and paddle work done.
And that's what you would deem as your strength work, is like the pull paddle.
At least in the pool. So I'm still working with weights outside of that, but typically within a run, bike, and swim scenario, if I say strength, bike would be kind of heavy gear work or hill work. Run would be hill work whether it be on the treadmill or outside. And then in the pool, when I say strength, it's really designated to paddles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes sense. That's a good differentiation though, because like I hear coaches talk about, oh yeah, we do a lot of strength work, within our running, and that's why this runner is so good now because they've done strength work. And I almost am certain that they're not talking about lifting a lot, right? They're doing like a lot more of those, like that hill stuff or like mile repeats or, other things along those lines. So yeah, it's a good differentiation because I think some of us, I mean, myself included, like, I still have a tough time differentiating between the two sometimes, but I actually want to go back to, so your VO2 max work, because I'm interested in potentially starting to add some of this stuff to my workouts. So when you do 3 by 8 minutes and it's, 40 15s, 40 20s, 30 30s, those are generally kind of like and you can progress, like the intervals, like however you want. Do you rest between sets?
So I do. And
Okay.
typically for things that are that short, it's a typical 2 to 3 minute recovery where I'm probably like, we could get into the details of anaerobic work capacity or W prime, but the key is to really kind of ramp that battery back up. So therefore you can get into that next set, hit the targets that you have and get the physiological benefits and hit the demands from that workout. So right. What we kind of find is, each individual is going to kind of recover a different way. We find that 2 to 3 minutes with those VO2 max short is kind of a good timeline between sets to get that anaerobic work capacity recharged up to get you into that and get you through that next group of workout or sets, I should say.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is it full rest, or are you like kind of having like ghost pedaling, or is it like a certain percentage of FTP?
It can be, we typically recommend kind of 30 to 45% of FTP in that case. So if I have, you're looking at, it could go across a bunch of different wattages, but I look at kind of that, the goal is to kind of pedal, allow some buffering to go on and recharging. You could very well use it as a static break, but I just kind of like the passive and just get some movement into the legs with that just light pedaling.
Yeah. And then within, so during, like, say if you're doing 30 or 40 15s, that 15-minute low, what's the goal there? Is it, again, that full rest, or is it, like 50% VO2 or FTP?
So we're still roughly, and when I say we, just us as Endure IQ, we do have some, it depends on what we're like. If it's early off season, we're not going to manipulate that recovery too much. We will do some recovery manipulation to kind of change the dynamic and change the exposure. But in this phase, it really is that time off is there for recovery. So it's again right around that 40 to 45% of FTP. You're kind of getting the legs back recovered to get in for that next repetition. There will be times where when we get deeper into the off season, or we're now moving into that general base, like true general base phase, where we will do a little bit of manipulation of that recovery and maybe have it at 65 or 70%, which, really in this conversation, you're probably like, that's not that much. But when you come off of 118, 120%, that can really make a big difference. And it really is it's almost like, because for those of our audience that maybe is not familiar with W prime or anaerobic work capacity as much, look at it as the body's battery. So what you're trying to do is recharge that battery enough so therefore you tap into that charge, you give the output that you need. But there are times where we want to pull that battery down almost as low as we can to
Mm-hmm.
then still try to get a little bit of a charge to get through that next set. So that's where
Yeah.
we do throw in some of these workouts along that progression where we do manipulate that recovery, just at one, throw a little bit of deviation to the body, but also tap into that W prime and really work it to almost its very bare bones level of
Mm-hmm.
recovery and the ability to recover from that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And that's stuff that people ask me all the time. What's the best way to improve your VO2 max? So listen to this clip, take notes on it, and we give you at least 3 separate workouts, essentially, plus manipulating your recovery, manipulating your intra and interval recovery. And that could be a way of stimulating that VO2 max if you're trying to increase it. Right. So awesome. Yeah. That's a really good, wasn't expecting to talk about that, but I learned something already. So
Well, good. And Phil, let me add another piece to that is that to any athlete, don't just go in and rely on that number being the same output every single day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are a lot of athletes that come into, let's even say on a run, I got to run these 1K repeats at 150 or 315, or I have to do these 200s at this particular pace. There's some days where you're going to be reaching to that pace, and there's other days where you're going to be able to overshoot that. Recognize that within the workout and make these subtle changes. Now, we don't want to say, oh, that first one was super easy, and then I'm going to go searching for 15 or 20 seconds on that, or I'm going to go drop 50 more watts, and then you end up running into a brick wall. But you can elevate that ceiling by 2 or 3 seconds, maintain it through the course of that workout, and then really get some benefits because you truly tapped the system that we were trying. We've talked about it multiple times where we coach that 80-20 method. The 80% should be guiltily easy, but that 20%, we want to make sure that we are really pulling from the bottom of that barrel.
Yeah.
This is where that's going to come. But if you assume, well, my watts are always going to be in this particular workout 400 watts. Well, let's say that you're not up to that day. Well, don't put yourself into a negative advantage for the rest of the week. Or if you're in that workout and you're like, well, 400 today, it feels really obtainable, and I feel like I got more gas to give, don't hesitate to jump that up to 410, 415 if that day presents it. So I guess my recommendation to our listeners is don't be afraid to evolve in that particular workout and make the necessary adjustments to tap into what that goal of that workout is. And often with Endure IQ on our workouts, we explain some of this where not only are we going to tell you the watts that we expect you to hit, or want you to hit, I should say, we're going to also say, here's the ratings of perceived exertion, or RPE. If you're not hitting that, don't be afraid to tick that up slightly, because that's where that needle's going to move. That's where you're going to become a better athlete and move yourself into a position of getting better after that workout.
Or move it down. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Like if you're having a shitty day, it's like, okay, well, it's okay to bump it down, because, and I think Dr. Jacobs and I talk about this quite a bit, is like, or I just talk about this in general, is those physiological metrics that we measure, right? VO2 max, FTP, second threshold, those are kind of fluid, where, one day, say coming off your strength work, right? Your legs might feel a little heavier than if you had recovered the last 2 days, right? So, so it's one of those things where, it's okay to adjust that bias down a little bit, to adjust the bias up a little bit. But the key is you're, especially during those high intensity days, you're trying to elicit the most amount of adaptation. And that comes from the proper implementation of stress in that sort of situation. And so it's okay to go a little bit higher. It's also okay to go a little bit lower. Say, for example, 400 is your goal, but that felt a little heavy. You're like, oh, I'm breathing pretty hard. 2 to 3 minutes isn't going to be enough recovery. Bump it down, 10 watts, something like that. Give it a shot. If it's still a little too hard and you think you're, headed towards a crash, then it's like, okay, well, then you have to start thinking, do I drop it even lower, or is today not the day? Right. Because that's also one of those sort of situations where I see people, they're like, well, VO2 max work was on the schedule today, so I have to get my VO2 max work done. It's like, if you're not ready for it and you feel like absolute garbage sometimes, it's okay to stop that workout and then do it again tomorrow or, a day afterwards.
Well, be realistic with yourself in that
Yes.
case, where if you feel like garbage going into that workout, you feel like garbage in the workout, what do you think you're going to feel like?
Well, you're going to have a garbage workout.
So
yeah.
You could actually, in that case, prolong your recovery period where you're not getting quality sessions in the day or even 3 or 4 days after that workout because you feel so destroyed. And it was just because your mind got into the way that I got to do this workout. I just have to get it done. Well, why? Because the coach put it there? Okay, well, reach out to your coach. Your coach is going to be more than happy to say, well, yeah, we could be playing and flirting with a little bit of disaster. So let's make this adjustment so we can get into a quality session tomorrow and the day after.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. No, that was great. So I want to switch a little bit. I want to switch gears. So, it's like we set up our training, we do all this sort of stuff, but I think at the beginning of the season, right, you have to have some level of goal setting in order to actually try to appropriately then set up your training for the season. It's kind of the first portion of the roadmap. So, Aaron, if you wouldn't mind, it's like, what are your goals and how do those then shape your training? And then what we can do is we can start to get into, if an athlete came to you, how would you, approach goal setting? But I'd just be interested to hear what your goals are and then how that actually affects your training. Cause I'll share mine as well.
So right now I'm still looking to add one race, but I'm looking to have races in October and December of this coming year. And one of the things that I looked at is because I went ahead and did get the qualification for Ironman 70.3 in New Zealand. I was going out there anyway, and I think that I had the option of racing. I most likely will race. And I felt like getting the season started too early would have really made it, like we've had a couple of talks in the past on this about extending your season out too long. And then you just get to that final phase of training and you're like, man, I feel like I'd rather be doing anything else. I'd rather be in the kitchen right now than being on my bike, which anybody that knows me, the painting is not something that's at the top of my list of things. So I am looking. So with Endure IQ, we have a training camp in April in Arizona. I have set up a training camp for my pros in February, which I will be at down. We're still working out the details, but we at least have it narrowed down to 2 places, and I'm going to be there for that. So my goals are also kind of directed by my professional goals and my professional responsibilities within Endure IQ and my athletes. So I looked at it as saying, I don't want to get the season started too early because then 1, that would take too much focus away from my athletes. 2, it would take away from some of these things that I do have coming up that are important to not just me, but the communities that I work in with and I am involved with. So from that, I then look at, okay, I try to avoid setting up time goals just because I feel like you're chasing one number when there are so many things involved in that day. If you just get out there and chase a number, you can't dictate what weather you're going to get that day. You can't dictate if you're going to have, non-calm seas, or if you do get calms. There's just so many different things. So I don't like chasing a number. In this, I really just try to move the goal to being able to sustain certain thresholds for periods of time, then that's when I recognize that I'm ready to go. So with that, it's being able to sustain wattage for, if I'm doing a full distance Ironman, I would like to sustain that wattage for 4.5 hours, a little bit longer, to make sure that when I get into that event, that's going to feel comfortable. From the half distance, it's holding that time at pace. I like to go a little bit over, just because in that case, it doesn't take as much time of training and you're pushing a little bit of higher wattage. But I like to get to that higher wattage for a 70.3 of kind of 245, maybe even 3 hours in that case, even though I might be on the bike for 215. Then part of what I want to try to accomplish in this early season is I want to get off and be able to run 125 or 124, and also try to run a 305, 308 in a full. So in that development, I'm putting the plan in to at least hit those levels. So what I end up doing is then building that plan backwards of, okay, I'm going to have a taper from this race. From that taper, I'm going to have this competition phase. Here's what I want to accomplish to hit those numbers that I had just kind of talked about. With in swimming, it's more of trying to maintain technique rather than just, I can go into a pool and hit 112s per yard, but if I sustain that for longer periods of time, or I shouldn't say, when I go longer periods of time, that number starts to drop back. So I do try to get consistently into that 122, 123 range of being able to hold 600s of thousands, things like that. But the numbers I typically really focus on is the running and the bike output. So I'm building backwards. I build that competition phase, typically about 6 to 8 weeks, just to make sure that I start to bring those numbers within alignment. The specific phase comes right before that. And with that, it's my first introduction to a lot of those higher intensities and starting to extend those intensities out. So it's more or less of, okay, I'm going to work shorter duration to get to those or slightly above those targets. So they just extend from time over that 6 to 8 week period for me. Then before that, it's a matter of just putting in the time and volume before that. And that's kind of how I set my season up to reach those goals. And hopefully that answers your question, Phil. I felt like I kind of started to drag on a little bit there.
No. I think that's that was a really good way of how you set it up. Is you say, okay, well, I'm not going to set like a time goal, for example, for the like half Ironman New Zealand, because there's so many things I can't control on a given day. Or like, this is something else people come to me with, is like a place goal. Like they're like, oh, I want to get top 5. It's like, dude, you can't control who shows up to your race. You can only control how you race. So by having, like, yes, maybe a time goal would be nice, right? Oh, well, the average of the top 5 for the last, 10 years was, I don't know, 8:45 or something like that for my age group. Then, okay, maybe that's a starting point, right? But then what you have to do is you have to break that into further goals, like you were kind of talking about. It's like, you're going to get a really good idea of how fast you're going to be able to go with a set amount of power. And that power is really going to, especially on a bike, that's going to be really driving, is it sustainable or not? Speed is so subjective, right? You could go up a hill, down a hill, go faster, go slower. And it's like, whoa, like, your power output just changed from 300 to 100. But if you know that, for example, your sustainable power, at least at whatever temperature you're training at and stuff, is, 250 watts, then you're like, okay, I know not to go over that, because I can maintain this for the 5 hours that I need to be on the bike. And so then it's like, okay, then you can start building backwards and you can say, okay, well, how do I actually get to that point? And what you described is kind of what Jonah, who's another guy I've had on the podcast numerous times, is this. It's called a funnel effect. So you start at the beginning of the season kind of with like, building up a base. And then the closer you get, you kind of bring up that the easy work still needs to be easy, but it's still brought up a little bit. The hard work starts out super hard, right? You're doing, like super hard VO2 max intervals right now, but then you're extending it a little bit and you're decreasing the output, and you're getting more sport specific or race specific as you get closer and closer to that actual race. And obviously there's, different phases of the season, that will have a little bit different focus. But yeah, no, for me, that made a lot of sense. And if you're an individual who has those racing goals, I want to be this fit by this amount of time. I think, what you just described, I think people could have a pretty good, they could have a pretty good blueprint for where to go.
And I think to kind of push this out to other individuals as well, like the way that I approach my season is one way. The way that I then approach my athletes based on whether they're age groupers or professionals, it kind of, what we do initially is start to have the conversation of, okay, what races are you interested in? We think about that phase. That's typically kind of in that early stage of the off season. Okay, I want to get you, like, one of my goals for the off season is to get the athletes fully like remotivated and charged up for the season that's about ready to come up. So early, we're talking about, okay, I'm handling your workouts, but let's start to shaping up what your race year looks like. What looks attractive to you? Okay, let's take those back to the family. Let's have the conversation of how that fits within the family's dynamic, your personal work schedule, some of these other parameters. Then we come back at the back portion. I should say a couple of weeks, not back portion of the off season, but a couple of weeks into that off season. We then start to solidify those races. Okay, well, we're going to attack these races. We're going to put them onto the calendar. I am then going to start to build that backwards effect for those particular athletes. One of the conversations I think we had 2 weeks ago was athletes that maybe race too much through the course of the season, and recognizing that, we don't want to keep you in the specific and competition phases for too long of a period of time because we're going to have diminishing gains. You're also going to most likely start to just feel burnt out, or you're not going to feel as motivated getting into these workouts. And especially in that particular phase, Phil, we recognize with the amount of stress induced with those workouts, you need to be motivated. You can't go into those workouts saying,
yes,
I got another, 15 minutes of effort at race pace, whether it be run, bike, or swim. If you're not engaged or if you're not feeling that workout, you're most likely not going to hit the targets of that day. You're going to walk away super emotionally drained, and you're going to end up possibly causing a couple of bad workout days after that particular day. And that motivation is just going to continue to get worse. So with that is really setting up the right plan for that athlete. So in my case, if I started to race, or if my plan is to race at the back half of the year, I don't want to have a whole lot going on in the middle of the year, because that means at the start of the year, I'm getting ready for that middle of the year. I'm coming off of that middle of the year to go right back into the back half of the year. So it's really trying to set up that flow to the season with the athletes. So therefore the goals can maintain their focus, because if we just throw stuff on there, the goals sometimes get a little bit it's just like they just get complex, and where you think, oh yeah, this first one I went 5 hours, well, the second one I'll be able to go 4:45 without a doubt in the 70.3. But if it's at the back end of a 4 race season, you might not be able to ever hit 4:45, because the body and your mind are just like, forget you. I don't want to be on the bike, or I don't want to be in the pool. And
Yeah. And it, again, I've shared this experience before, but I used to coach cross country runners, and I really think in high school and in junior college, the two areas that I coached, we have a tendency to over race individuals. And what you see is you see PRs at the beginning to the middle of the season, and then it's kind of all downhill from there, and not in a good way, right? The times get worse and worse and worse. So that's obviously like shorter races, and that's why you can do 12 to 20 races in a cross country season. But the longer the race gets, you also have to remind yourself the longer recovery time is going to be, the more the buildup has to be, especially if you're kind of starting from a point where you're trying to build more volume. Maybe the pros are a little bit more resilient and have that volume underneath them. But I know for me, and I didn't train as optimally as I possibly could for my Ironman. But when I was done with it, I was like, did not want to even think about getting on a bike for like 3 months afterwards. So again, having those goals and coming up with those goals as an athlete is great. But then running them by a coach, I think, is even better, because a coach, at least if they have some experience, is going to say, oh, well, they're not going to tell you directly maybe, but they're going to say, oh, well, I've seen this before. And, maybe we need to temper this goal a little bit. Maybe it's not possible for us to actually get to that point this season, but with consistency and everything like that, maybe this is what your goal, could be, based on the testing that we've done, based on your prior experience, based on those sort of things. And, so another thing that I do want to talk about, though, is like, there's people who are motivated by the fact that they want to race a lot. And putting the race on the schedule is what's going to motivate them to actually train and do all of that. That's what I consider an outcome goal. You're racing, or you're training, and you're doing all this physical preparation for the outcome of being able to either complete the Ironman, the half Ironman, or do your best in whatever race that is. There's also things called process goals. So process goals would be, I'm going to, or let's think of one. It'd be, I'm going to do 95% of my workouts over the course of the next 6 weeks. And that's the process. The process is you trying to be there every single day to get your workout done, with the idea that by completing that process, establishing those habits, and following a good training plan that, say, your coach is giving you, you're going to set yourself up for improvement, right? Your goal isn't, I'm going to get better. It's, I'm going to be more consistent. And then that leads to you getting better. So I don't know. There's no right way or wrong way of thinking about like a goal, but certainly some people are motivated a little bit more by the outcome goals. Personally, I'm more motivated for the process goals. Like right now, I'm like, I want to get on the bike, or I want to get on the bike 5 days a week, and I want to run 2 days a week. And, from there, then what I can do is I can say, okay, well, I'm hitting all those workouts. Now my goal is I'm going to increase my volume between 2 and 10% week to week. And, so then it's still a process, because I still need to go back and I still need to do all of that volume, with the idea that because I'm following, at least for me, my justification is I'm still following those principles of consistency, specificity, and progression. I'm going to, the result of me following those process goals is to be a better athlete. So I don't have to have a race on the schedule. And, like I think we talked about this a little earlier, is like, you're like, yeah, sometimes I just want to be fit enough that if a race comes up that I want to do in, I don't know, 14 weeks or something like that, then I could do a specific phase in the competition phase and feel tuned up and ready to go. But other than that, I'm training with the idea that I'm going to be maintaining or gaining fitness. so that my body is then tuned up, or my body is prepared to then handle, the specific loads and the competition loads. And that's kind of where I'm at actually right now. I'm like, I got no idea. I kind of want to do some gravel races. Those would be super fun. Maybe like a mountain race might be super fun too, with just a shitload of elevation gain. But right now, I don't see anything on the horizon. I'm just like, yeah, I have a hill in my backyard and I run loops of that, and that's super fun with me. What I do is I grab one dog. So we have four dogs, and we're fostering another dog right now. So I grab one dog and they run a loop with me. And by the time we're done, that dog is probably pretty toast, because they do the stupid thing of like sprinting ahead and then coming back and sprinting ahead and then coming back. And then they're like, oh, this is a bad idea. So I put them away, grab my other dog, and then they do the same thing. So I get to exercise the dogs, right? But I'm trying to increase, my volume on those loops. And I have an idea of how fast I can do those loops as well. So it's like, okay, well, I can progress today either by doing more or doing a little faster or reducing my rest a little bit. With the idea, it's like, I have no idea. It's like, I just go out and run,
Well, and I think by some of the things that you talked about earlier in that process, where they're specific, they're measurable. I mean, these are kind of those principles of SMART goals. And if you give yourself like structured goals, you are going to be able to progress through that process. And I often, with athletes that I have been associated with for longer periods of time, I mean, Phil, you recognize this. We often are working with type A personalities that think that they can move the moon from 1 meter to the right, and it's just not possible. And I have had a couple of conversations with individuals of, okay, I know that you want to hit 100%, but your sample size has not shown that you can hit 100%. So let's look at 94%. And I know that, like, one of the conversations I had with an assistant coach, she's like, well, that's a weird number. It's like, well, it's just enough to keep you progressing, but also not be too hard on yourself. Because if you put 100% of yourself as your expectation and you miss that one workout, you can't get back to 100%. So no matter how hard you work, you're then chasing a number, and it becomes easy to miss that second workout, that third workout, that fourth workout. Next thing you know, you've missed a week, or you've only done one workout that week. If we had 94% in that case, okay, you miss one, you're still battling. You're still like on the horse to keep that number and that. So looking at it over the course of 50 workouts, that's really, I have the buffer of 3 workouts to miss in that case over the course. And really 50 workouts for a triathlete or 50 workouts for an endurance athlete is kind of probably what you're probably hitting in a month in a lot of cases. So looking at it as, well, I only missed 3 workouts this month. For a lot of people, that's checking all the boxes. The big problem is when you're missing 10, 15, 80% of the workouts, then that's where, one, the coach wants to wring your neck, but 2, you're also not getting any progression in that case. So recognizing what type of compliance that you've done in the past, and if you've only had 50% compliance in the past, there's no reason for you to set the expectation up for yourself to be 100%. Let's give ourselves a little leeway and still give that number where there's a carrot involved. So if you miss that one workout, it's not like, well, can't get, no matter how hard I work, I'll just be at 99% in that case. Well, let's give yourself enough of a leeway so if you miss that one workout and maybe another workout, you're still on path to hit what that percentage is of the workouts that you want to hit. And I think that that's still important, and maybe having that conversation with your coach that gives you the leeway that if you miss one workout, okay, it didn't turn into 7 workouts being missed because you just kind of said, well, my goal is not obtainable, so I'm just going to, give up on the week. And maybe that's not the best thing for everybody involved.
Yep. Yeah. I think too, self-coached athletes, speaking from experience, because I try to self-coach myself almost all the time. We have a tendency of doing exactly what you just said, is setting goals that are almost unobtainable, and then when we don't quite reach it, or when something happens and we have to, and we don't get that perfection, we don't get that 100%, we're just like, yep, throw your hands up and just be frustrated. And then it's kind of an on the wagon, off the wagon sort of deal, where you're like either training really, really hard, or you're not training at all, as opposed to building up those habits of, for example, like that's what I'm trying to do, is just like, okay, build into my routine every morning. After I get X, Y, and Z done, I get on the bike and I do my workout for the day. And, that requires planning, right? It requires, and especially, for example, if you're a, if like high functioning individual in terms of, you're super busy at work, you got a family, you have kids, other things like that, then your responsibilities are a mile long. And it's exactly what you were saying, Aaron, is you have to have that conversation with your family of, is this realistic for me to be able to spend 2 hours in the morning every morning, riding my bike, or, being in the pool, or running, or whatever it is. Aaron, you mentioned this earlier, and I think you kind of, you glazed over it a little bit, but your goals have to be SMART. And that's not just, I think about my goals. It's an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, what's
Reachable.
the R? Reachable. So attainable, reachable, which are similar, realistic,
Yeah,
reachable and realistic. There it is. And timely. Okay. We got it. So when you go through, the first thing you do is you just write down, what do you want to accomplish? And you say, okay, I want to do an Ironman in 10 hours, something like that. Maybe that's what your initial goal is. Then when you go through and you edit that, you say, okay, specific, what am I going to do in order to actually complete an Ironman in 10 hours? You have to specifically state what you're going to do. Measurable, you have to measure what you're going to do. So for example, you say, okay, I'm going to complete a 10-hour Ironman by completing all of the workouts that my coach gives me. That's pretty specific. You're going to complete the workouts that your coach is giving you. It's measurable because you can say, did I do the workout or did I not do the workout? You can even edit that a little bit more to make it more attainable, saying, okay, I'm going to do 94% of the workouts that my coach gives me, because that's probably a little bit more attainable if you're thinking back to this whole discussion that we just had. Realistic, if you're a type of person who has never done more than 50% of the workouts, then it's not realistic to say 94%. And then timely, the last one is, goals should really be in 4 to 6 week chunks. So what you should do is you should say, okay, well, my outside goal is to do the Ironman in 10 hours. And in order to get there, I'm going to be consistent. So for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and what you say is, you say, starting on, November 12th and ending on December 25th, because that would probably be about 6 weeks, I am going to complete 94% of the workouts that my coach prescribes to me. That would be a SMART goal, right? As opposed to, I'm going to complete an Ironman in 10 hours. Like that doesn't get you the SMART portion of it.
And again, it comes back to putting the time into that goal to also make sure that it is reachable. I mean, like kind of what we talked about, where it's, if you don't run faster than 11-minute miles and your average pace on the bike is 12 miles an hour, let's not throw that 10-hour time frame out, because it's not, it's just not attainable at that point. So being realistic with yourself, and can I really hit this, and taking that time to really make that goal specific is very important in that case. Because even if you set yourself up for a goal, as we said, that's not realistic, that's not a SMART goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's, that's again, that's the experience of the coach is going to really tell you, is this something that seems, to be, first of all, realistic, and then second of all, in the time that we have to develop you, attainable? Because, maybe a 10-hour Ironman is attainable, but in 2 or 3 years of consistent training, right? So you'd have to string together, remember, SMART goals are supposed to be like 4 to 6 weeks, and then you readjust. You'd have to string together, like a lot of of that consistency in order to start to be able to get there. But that's also where a coach, is like huge proponent of getting coaches, because they are looking at things from an objective point of view, rather than you yourself looking at stuff and being subjective about how, it's like, oh no, that looks like a realistic workout that I could get done. And it's like, so out of your league that it would, just leave you, like trashed for 5 days. Your coach is going to be like, that's not realistic. We need to dial it back in. Here's the workout that you actually should do. And, I think like I get messages from people all the time. They're just like, hey, it's really hard, for me to progress, because what happens is I work hard and then I get injured, and then I start again and I work hard and I get injured. And my question is like, well, first of all, how are you measuring intensity, and how are you, figuring out what sort of workouts you actually need to do? And most of the time it's like, well, I'm following what I read online. I'm doing some workouts, like I'm doing the Norwegian method, for example. And it's like, have you even done one threshold workout a day? Because jumping into 2 threshold workouts a day isn't going to be something that's like, in terms of progression, appropriate for now. And maybe it is something that you could get to, but the reason why this comes back to our last conversation is like, don't be elite, right? If you're trying to train like the pros, but your body and your structures aren't set up to actually, handle the load of the professional athletes, then it doesn't make sense for you to just jump in and automatically, start doing something like that.
We can probably beat this horse, but people are still going to go out and make that same mistake. And I reiterate, from a coaching perspective in this case, if your long-term goal is to make sure that you set multiple goals. And if you have a long-term goal that you want to get to, like you talked about, where 10-hour Ironman that might not be there today, but might be there in 3 years. We need to make sure that you are progressing through those stages. And the only way that you're going to progress from that stage where you're at to that position in 3 years or 2 years or whatever that might be is to progress through your workouts as well, progress the exposure of things. And it's often when we do have athletes that say, okay, I want to accomplish this year as far as racing, sometimes it is important for that coach to say, well, okay, this year, is it more important than your 3-year goal? And if you say yes, then that should be answered with a plan to make that the priority. But where I see good planning and goal setting is making sure that each one of those stages away from where we are today to where that ultimate goal is that you want to get to is being checked off. And I have a couple of athletes that are like, man, you just don't like Olympic distance or sprint distance triathlons. I said, no, I've never once, I don't want to give that perception, but every goal that you've given me is a 70.3 or a full distance Ironman. And it's not that I don't like those distances. It's the fact that where your ultimate goal is, these aren't necessarily as specific to getting you to those goals. We're talking about a significant difference of time between a sprint distance and a full distance Ironman. You might be on the course for 1 hour and 15 minutes if you're trying to be on the course for 9 hours in an Ironman. That's not necessarily relatable, and you're you are racing at two completely different percentage pieces of your threshold in either one of those races. So it's making sure that you also align those goals. And I'm not saying don't sign up or don't participate in certain events, but have specific goals with yourself or with your coach to make sure that that moves the needle to what you specified as the most important goal. If your most important goal is a 70.3 PR, then if we don't step in and we're not super sharp for that Olympic because we've been training for that 70.3 distance, that's got to be okay. You can't expect to even somebody like Christian, who has had success at the Olympic distance and half distance and full distance in that case, they still had specific phases where they were dialing into that training to be prepared for that race distance. And even in the short amount of time that they did that, there was still big segments to prepare themselves for Olympic distance or for full distance Ironman. And then they came back to half distance Ironman, which they could really then kind of minimalize that sample size, but go really, really hard at the intensities that they could hold because they already had the foundation. So recognizing from the athlete perspective that if I state this as this is the most important or this is important to me, we sometimes have to recognize that the specificity of training for another event that you want to do does not match up for what your goal is. You need to recognize that, okay, sometimes that might not be the goal that we need to hit. I need to really cross that sprint distance off, focus on that longer weekend to move the needle to get me to that PB that I want to get to, or recognize that maybe we have to focus on other things and we missed that main goal. So being realistic with yourself, being understanding of yourself, that if it is important, sometimes you got to move some of the noise off the main page and focus on the main page.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well. Your goals are to keep you focused and on the correct path. It's not perfectly linear, but at least with goal setting and rechecking in on those goals and understanding where you want to get to, you give yourself a much better opportunity to make the deviations from that path less and less. If we're talking about kind of like that sine wave that we've been talking about, it's like, yeah, performance is going to go up and down all the time, but you want that trend to be up. And if those peaks and valleys are even lower within that, you're going to give yourself the opportunity to reach those most important priority goals first. So, get rid of the noise, set goals. And I think we'll leave you guys with that. If you have any questions or just, want to sound off, leave a comment down below. You can reach me at Critical02 on Instagram. You can reach Aaron at Try a Geiser. You can also, if you want coaching or anything like that, if we haven't convinced you to get a coach yet, you haven't been listening to the podcast. But Endure IQ, I don't know if you guys are taking athletes or anything, but it's always worth looking at their philosophies and seeing if it matches up with you, and then going from there. Aaron, do you want to leave anybody or leave them with anything else?
We always are taking athletes under the Endure IQ name, so we can be found at enduriq.com. Also, I talked about it a little bit earlier. I know you probably won't care that we do have that training camp in April. It is on our website, so if you have any interest, don't hesitate to head over to the website and gather some information there. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate. I feel like we sprayed over a lot of topics today. So if you guys have anything, it's nice to... We get on these calls often and we talk about what we really want to talk about. So if you have some interest, let us know. We are more than happy to kind of go off our script and go onto your script and help guide you through some of the things that maybe are sticking points for you, or things that you could have a little bit more clarification on as well.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome, everybody. Well, we'll catch you guys in the next one.